Hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday, and welcome to another edition of Gen City Labs Live. We have a really fun and educational experience on tap for everybody today. We are going to talk about innovation experiences for customers and prospects, specifically in executive briefing centers and innovation labs inside organizations. Before we get into it, we're Gen City Labs. We are a creative technology studio that specializes in building out digital innovative experiences for brands. That touches on everything from events through executive briefing centers, through retail and beyond. With me today, I have a couple of special guests. We have Tom Maher with Pinnacle and Sid Van Wijk with Miro. I'll let them introduce themselves. We also have MK Badowski, our head of marketing at Gen City Labs, and I'm Mike Shaman, CEO of Gen City Labs. So without further ado, gentlemen, Tom, why don't you introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about your background?
Sure. Thank you. First, let me say thank you for having me on this edition of GCL Live. So good to be here. I've been loving the series. I'm Tom Maher with Pinnacle. We're an immersive experience design group here in the U.S. So work globally to design, build, and manage all kinds of immersive experiences, whether that's more event-based or more permanent-based. And we do a lot of work within the briefing program space as well as innovation centers. And here at Pinnacle, as Director of Strategy and Growth, I handle our strategy practice. I also consult on digital, and I help clients sort of maximize their efforts about how to use EBCs to drive the greatest amount of business value.
Awesome. Cool. Sid.
Yeah.
Floor is yours.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name is Sid van Wijk, which probably sounds very Dutch, which I am. Currently in Amsterdam. It's 10 o'clock here, but fully awake. I work with Miro. Miro is an online collaboration space, an online workspace, and I lead their executive briefing center, their EBC, but we just rebranded it to Miro Discovery Centers, and I'm guessing we're going to explain a lot more about that.
We certainly will. It's great to have you guys with us. Once again, we do this every 2 weeks. So if you are watching on LinkedIn, we are also rebroadcasting to YouTube and Twitter and everywhere else. So thank you for those of you watching live. Also, thanks to those who are watching remote at a later date. So let's dive in and talk a little bit about where experience lives and where the executive briefing center experience lives within the marketing stack. Tom, why don't you start off and kind of, for those that may not be as familiar as others, tell folks kind of a little bit of background on why they are important and what opportunities they have for brands to connect more directly with their consumers.
Sure. Yeah. Maybe helpful to start out with the definition of EBCs and sort of where they fit in the mix. And Sid obviously will weigh in after I proffer my humble opinion, because there is some discussion and some debate about what that exactly is. So, for the purposes of the call today, I think we're going to design EBCs as really primarily focused on physical environments as well as hybrid environments to host customers, to do deals, build relationships between, partners and customers and, our business's key executives, subject matter experts, and product owners, with the idea of, driving some new business arrangement and obviously putting together some long-term partnerships, right? So we're hosting them for half-day, full-day, multi-day, in-office as well as virtual, simultaneously virtual experiences, and the happening post-visit as well, right? So this briefing will take place. We try to make it as rich an experience as possible for our customers. That's been known to accelerate the sales cycle and then increase the average deal size of those sales. So there's been a lot of research done on why EBCs. And, if you had to have one takeaway from this meeting, it would be, it helps you sell more, it helps you sell faster and grow your organization and help your customers quicker. So really that's what EBC fits.
What I like really about these executive briefing centers is that it's so focused on one customer at a time. It's high touch. Really, we take at least 4 weeks to fully prepare this one customer engagement, right? We work with the speakers to create tailored content, co-create this agenda together with the customer, really trying to figure out what is the most relevant of engagement we could have on that 1 day or even 2 days. Often we have 2 days I'm a big fan of lunch to lunch, where we start with lunch and end with lunch on the second day. And really, because we try to be as relevant as possible with these engagements. And usually there's a lot to learn. This is why we rebranded our center to Miro Discovery Center, because we love the discovery aspect of it. We can discover something about the customer and they can discover something about us. And this mutual discovery is really strengthening the partnership and really focusing on that relationship going forward. It's not really a center where you sell products, but it's more like where you sell the brand, right? And focus on long term.
Yeah, I've always seen it, as a great relationship building opportunity when you have that much time with a group. That is, really about taking a deep dive, not only into products and services, but you start peeling back the layers that you don't necessarily get to, because most of our meetings are 30 minutes to an hour. So having the opportunity to actually be that immersed in, a brand's message, I think is incredibly valuable. We have at Gen City, we've been building out, digital experiences inside briefing centers for a whole lot of years. We've worked with Visa, we've worked with technology companies, done some work with Facebook before they were Meta. And, it seems that part of the edict is also, we want to, the medium is the message, right? We need to speak through innovative mediums in order to establish the kind of message throughout. Tom, in your experience, and maybe before we dive into some tactics about ways to engage, what are some of the more impressive EBC experiences that you've seen, some of the more memorable ones that have resonated with you? Because I know you've done a lot of these as well.
Absolutely. And so this speaks to this idea that has really been emerging coming out of COVID, which is that there are, on one end of the spectrum, beautiful jewel case, large EBC programs that emphasize like an environmental immersion into a space. And you could look at what Dell has done over the years, what Salesforce is doing within their briefing program, and they leverage this idea of these beautiful immersive environmental designs. And that's certainly been a trend over the years. So I would call those two out. And there are many others referenced in the world-class briefing program through the ABPM, a well-known industry organization, and highly recommend you point towards that. But I want to say also that on the other end of the spectrum, there are briefing programs that don't emphasize the environmental, that maybe they have a smaller space. Maybe it's they're in a rented property. It doesn't allow them to really build out and customize within the four walls, of their environment. So it isn't necessarily about architectural design in terms of how great the program is, quote unquote. And in those cases, it is about content and customizing the experience and really making it all about the customer. So I want to, obviously, environment's important, but I would like to just check, it doesn't have to be about having some beautiful, large jewel case environment showcase. It can be something that is on a smaller scale, but done really, really well and really, really personalized for the customer.
In the end, it's all about sincerity and connection, right? And you use the center to create a better connection, right? And to tell a better story. And it really depends on the product, right? If you're a very tangible product, if you're Boeing, for example, there's a lot to show. There's a lot to experiment, and you probably there's a lot to see, right? But for SaaS companies, it's completely different, right? So it's really cool to really figure out how can I place the brand in the center and really create that journey in the center, in the building, where I take my customer through to really tell the story. And there's an art to it, right?
Absolutely. And I think it's an important point of distinction now between briefing programs and what you would call an innovation center or a customer experience center. They have different labels. So again, just for the sake of, agreeing on terms, the Innovation Center and your typical customer experience center will host briefings. So you will host customers for deep dives into product roadmaps and discuss deal making and discussing how to apply new learnings to R&D and development, which we'll talk about more in a little bit as a new trend to pay attention to. But also this idea that they would have an R&D facility in the briefing, in the Innovation Center, or would have product managers and product owners in the Innovation Center. So there's this added, for those of us who are looking over not just a briefing program, but also an innovation center and a customer experience center combined, there's this idea of it being a working location for your own employees, right? And so this, for both innovation centers and briefing programs, and Sid, I know that you have some very strong opinions on this, how do you design for both employees as well as customers and create these a hive of productivity for your team as well as hosting customers.
Yeah, I love the combination, really. I joined Miro a year ago, and it was a weird time, right? Because it was post-pandemic, and we all discovered new ways of working. And when I kicked off this, one of the questions Miro asked me is, okay, what do you actually need, right, for customers' engagements? What do you need? How does it centrally need to look like? And we didn't really know what this new way of working was. And I was talking a lot with a workplace organization who was also trying to figure out what is the new employee experience. So really cool conversation where we were in this experimental phase, really trying to figure out, okay, what's the role of an office? How do you engage with people, not just the customers, but also with employees? We came to really cool conclusions there where we started calling what we were building a living lab, because we had to learn so much. So we needed to make sure that we built in flexibility, and because that's a living part, and the lab part is really calling it one big experiment. So everyone who was coming over to our briefing center, our discovery center, but also to this office, which we call the living lab, was now part of an experiment where we doubled down on feedback and really making sure that we could change based on how they used it and what we learned there. And we did that all together, trying to figure out what this new way of working was. And one of the results of that is really finding new ways of purchasing and filling up an office with furniture and tech. And we started to throw everything on a subscription, which I think is quite unique. When you have like a chair with an SLA of 3 weeks, and if you don't like it, you can swap it around. And now I have a center which is on version 6, it feels. The cool thing about this, we always have the latest and greatest. We're not stuck in any way. So in this living lab, you need to make sure that everything is movable, everything is on wheels, but also to make sure that when you bring something in and you get feedback on it, that you're able to either move it out or return it entirely, to make sure that you can change the space in such a way that it really fits the type of engagements that you're trying to build.
So I just want to double click on that for a second. So we were talking in preparation for this, Sid, and this label of like a subscription model came up. Yeah. Which I thought was a really interesting way of talking about it. So we're so used in the design and build out of environments to think in terms of architecture and sort of like permanent spaces, or maybe to a lesser degree sets that can flex and move and change. And it seems like you and Miro have you've gone even past that to this, let's just call it out and say that you can change on a weekly, monthly basis almost by going from a CapEx expenditure to an OpEx expenditure. I just thought that was so interesting. And
so we work with a few agencies which we work in such a way that we just let them know how many people we need to cater for, and how much square meter it is, and we work together with them trying to figure out, okay, how does that look like? And together we're trying to figure out, hey, this space might need to have this living room kind of environment, right? They bring in and we test it, and then if it works, it works. If it doesn't, we have the flexibility to change without any extra cost involved, because it's a subscription model, right? You're not renting a chair; it's just part of this whole subscription you have on the building. I've never heard that before. I think it's quite unique, but it helps us really. We've learned so much over the last year, really trying to figure out, for example, hybrid engagements. How do you do that in a space? No one knew, or it's so new. So we had to learn, and luckily we could change and learn and change and learn. So I think we now have 4 different flavors of hybrid engagement spaces, and we constantly get feedback on those rooms, right? And this is how we constantly improve.
Yeah. So
I love that. Well, the concept of evolution, and Tom, you touched on it, right? Typically, you get one big CapEx to invest in something, one big CapEx budget that you can invest in something, and that something has got to last for 5 years, right? 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, whatever that is. And then you've got an operating budget, which, traditionally gets renewed every single year. So I think that split is interesting. And I know in the software world, it definitely pulling from an operating budget makes it a little easier to change things, right? But if that's already built into a platform that you're using, if that is built into your strategy for how you're creating these spaces, I think it just adds ultimate flexibility, right? That means you can create new digital experiences. That means you can, adapt per client, and it just allows for a lot more. And Tom, I'm sure that you guys as environmental builders are also encapsulating the concept of adaptability through modular design and things that you
100%. I do. I'll dive into that in a second, but I was actually going to flip it
Yeah.
over to your court to talk about digital for a moment, right? Because Sid's talking about this idea of flexibility and changing on the fly. And for those who are practitioners within the EBC space, it's everything from digital signage to CMS tools that allow you to do presentations from a library of content on a screen and drag in the right content that's relevant to the conversation and support the conversation. Touchscreen, that can be changed relatively easily with a GUI in the back end, so you don't have to be a techie in order to do so. Can you talk a little bit about some advances of the past couple of years that you've seen on the digital side to help sort of address this idea of a flexible experience design?
Yeah, there's nothing worse than, I can't imagine sitting through 8 hours of PowerPoint, right? Like it's just
Speak for
brutal. So, no, we build a lot of experiences that encourage collaboration, and I know Sid, you're all about this, but finding unique ways to get an audience engaged, right? It's not just a monologue where you have one person presenting to a group. It becomes a dialogue. How do you engage that audience in unique ways, where there's brainstorming, where there's building, where there's collaboration, and how do you do that in memorable ways, right? And we've built virtual reality experiences, we've built augmented reality experiences that are kind of touch points where you kind of have, and there's always going to be elements where you need to have a bit of a presentation set up, but those interactive experiences for users, if they're using a specialized piece of hardware, if they're using a device, those are what turn out to be some of the more memorable moments for people that are engaging in those spaces. And they're also easy to update and swap out. So the nice thing is, that evolution can kind of carry through the experiential. It can carry through just about every element of the space.
Nice.
And briefings are long. You can survive a PowerPoint in this 1 hour meeting, but we do like 9 to 5 kind of sessions and sometimes longer. You cannot kill people with PowerPoint, right? You need to bring in the mix. We build journeys, not glorified meeting rooms. So we have one of our design principles is to have at least 3 rooms, right? Where we try to be really intentional with the journey as well. Have to walk, energize it, use the building. Let's have a standing meeting here, for example. And I think that's a huge part of it, to really stretch that attention span. But also hybrid is happening to us. It is not a choice, right? And in September, it was about 25% of my briefings were hybrid, meaning that someone is going to be dialing in for a portion of it. And now it's nearing 40%. So I need to make sure that both experiences, how they're wildly different, but I need to make sure that both experiences are really catered for and that they are good experiences, because usually in these hybrid settings, when someone dials in, they are the add-on, right? But you feel that this is not going to be a first-class experience because it was an in-person design and so I dialed in, so they just added a Zoom link, right? But the design for it and a lot of rooms are not built for it, right? So one of the things that we need to do, because we know that this number of hybrid is so enormous, right? About a big percentage, 40%, really trying to figure out what are both experiences, right?
You shared that stat, and that surprised me so much, knowing that we're seeing attendance at in-person events and corporate travel increase, to know that September to now, you've seen an increase in that hybrid audience and having to deliver the split experience is such an interesting challenge.
Yeah. It has a lot to do with travel bans, right? A lot of companies could travel, but usually in country, right? And we run briefings from all across the world. 2 weeks ago, we had a Japanese customer flying out. But it could as well be that someone could not make it. And the difficult thing is, it is usually the more senior person that is dialing in for a portion of the day. Is my camera frozen?
Nope, looking good.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you're fine. No, actually, it's a good time to reset the room. If you are just joining us or joining us a little bit late, this is Gen City Labs and our twice monthly LinkedIn live session. We'll also be broadcasting on other streaming platforms. This week, we're talking with Tom Maher and Sid Van Wijk about experience briefing centers and creating innovative customer experiences. So, Tom, I would kick back over to you to talk about environmental. because, the space, people are spending a lot of time in a space that takes thoughtful and strategic design. Also, as we've been talking about, how those experiences need to evolve over time, the spaces need to evolve as well. How are you guys dealing with that at Pinnacle, and what are you seeing from a trend perspective?
Absolutely. So obviously the task of, even before COVID was to create adaptable environments for all sorts of different use cases and audiences. And so that challenge has never changed. It's only gotten more urgent, and the timelines have compressed now between briefings, right? So the environments need to serve that purpose and be this stage. But the one thing that really hasn't changed, in our experience has been you have to get like the core of the brand and what it represents. You got to nail that from an environmental design standpoint and bring that to life in a way that's like a through line through environmental design. And then around that, because that'll never change. Ideally, that brand essence and what the brand stands for and its value to customers is permanent, right? So if you can sort of nail a through line architecturally throughout the space that will be consistent for the lifetime of the company, then you're cooking with gas. You're in a good place. Now, how things have to change around that is so that's your backbone, is this design thesis, right, that you nail, is to Sid's point around breaking. So one of the first things that happened post-COVID were briefings, right? Small, very small, constrained, one to few kind of meetings. So events lagged behind for a little bit, but the briefing folks came back, pretty rapidly post-COVID. And I think they started to borrow lessons that had originated on the event side of the business, actually the experiential side, who have been playing for almost a decade now with breaking up your typical B2B conference or experience into sort of bite-sized content and learning moments and breaks, at the right moments, and breaks that have entertainment, not just break to grab a coffee, but how do you rejuvenate, creating new ways of networking, right? So these kinds of things, I think the briefing program world has borrowed from events, and now the environments need to support this new. When you talk about design, it doesn't necessarily mean architectural design. It's how does the brand want to host customers and program a space, and how does the architecture serve that? How many rooms? What does each room do, and how is it configurable? How do you allow for relaxation without losing the attention span or losing them to their phone call for an hour and a half or 2 hours? So all these things factor into the environmental design. And to make a long story short, so we're creating designs that align to the programming thesis that we co-develop with our clients.
It's show, don't tell, right? I think if we have the center, we have the journey, we can show so much about the brand, but also show the story, right? And I think that's so much more powerful. We don't have to tell it, but you really feel it and you really see it. If you're all about openness and transparency, then let the customers be amongst your employees, for example. Let them stand in the same line for coffee. And that is something we really like. We get really good feedback on that's just part of the experience coming in. And there's a lot of relationship building into that, right? Being so transparent with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. MK, I want to bring you into this for a minute because, and for those of you guys that don't know MK, she came out of the consumer space working at Reed with New York Comic Con. She moved into the corporate space working with Gartner on the Gartner event side. I know you have a wish list of things that would be on your ultimate briefing center. So I wanted to fire it over to you to pose kind of a little bit of a scenario for these guys to say, here, if you had a permanent place where you could engage customers on a regular basis and you had the ability to tell in-depth stories, to create a really welcoming environment and to use really innovative tools to create that engagement, what would be most appealing, or what is on your wish list? And would love to get Sid and Tom's feedback in terms of the ultimate briefing center experience for consumers.
Yeah. So in my time at Gartner, I ran the Gartner Zone, which was Gartner's booth at its own conferences. So it's where sales would bring their prospects for closing deals or for product demos. So it served some of that purpose, but it was for a few days at a time only and constantly being assembled and disassembled at events around the world. And all I wish is that I'd had access to a briefing center or some shared resource that if I pooled some budget, I could have pulled from a storytelling element with them. That would have been awesome and a game changer. I think we talked a lot about storytelling. Often the easiest way to capture that was a case study. So then how do you take a case study that would traditionally be published as a PDF on a website and make it something more dynamic, more interactive, more maybe even choose your own adventure, something where you're trying different outcomes and seeing it. And I think we've talked a little bit about how these briefing centers apply to tech-based businesses, but I think there's also that parallel to service provider and building the trust of, if I'm going to sign a large contract with a service provider, consulting, that sort of category, how to build that trust through a digital experience would be on my wish list.
Very cool.
So there you go, guys. Who's taking first crack? How do you use this space to build trust?
Well, I thought that that would go to the Metrics question right away, which is, you're obviously, looking at the things you control, your lead measures, and then your lag measures. And, it really does come back from, building a relationship and providing really highly customized experiences for your visitors and for your briefing program, and giving them access to expertise and experts and ideas that no one else can give them, right? How do we give them something rare that can be found nowhere else? That's value creation, right? And that's trust building. So I would say that, if you could keep that kind of strategic imperative in mind while thinking about environmental design, content design, program design, like all those pieces can align to that guideline. I would say, provide that kind of value at every meeting, and you've got a good way to start measuring success. And then, obviously, there are the lead measures I mentioned, which are more about, number of briefings and the idea of developing qualitative surveys based on those. Are customers happy with them, by and large on average? But really, at the end of the day, briefing programs are all about sales and revenue and solving client problems. So
success has many angles, right? And success is different to different people. My success is, for example, when the program keep being used by the same account teams because they're returning. So I did something well, right? But one of the metrics which our organization loves is access to power, where they use our program, we build a relationship, and somehow after that long day together, you get the trust from the people you met with, and now you can work more often with them, but also meet new people through them within their organization. So there's a better partnership through it. So that is one metric. But one thing which I like, and this is something you noted on earlier, Tom, the success for our product teams and our engineering teams, because we try to involve them heavily, where they join the conversation, lead a session, lead a discussion, actually, where their metric of success is really hearing from customer, hey, we are working on this. What do you think? Right? And really getting that feedback, really getting a really cool quote, what they think about a certain strategic direction that we're going in. So it's really the beauty of it. We're such an island amongst all these different departments, but I'm really trying to figure out how can we be a success to you, right? And really trying to involve them as much as possible. So it's more integrated all together. And one example I'm going to mention is interactive displays, for example. Throughout COVID, this was not really developed a lot because no one had those large screens at home. But post-COVID, we needed to develop this a lot, and the drawing capabilities and everything like that. But there are so many different brands. So at one point, with product and design teams, we were working on 16 different brands of large interactive displays. And we just brought them in with customer engagements, and we brought product in, really trying to test it all together to join this experiment. And the feedback from the customer there for that team was their success, right? So it's that I love that relationship that we have throughout the whole organization.
Yeah, I love, Tom, I loved your statement on rarity. Provide a rare moment that cannot otherwise be accessed, because that really is, scarcity drives demand, right? Scarcity drives value. That's super fascinating. And then Sid, I want to I want to throw it back over to you because David asked a question, and I know Miro is deeply involved, and clearly you have a massive hybrid audience. And I'll actually give my background before we dive into this. So, when our organization had been very deeply involved in building interactive experiences on site. So that had been Super Bowls, that had been trade shows, that had been events, that had been EBCs, that had been, you name it. When 2020 rolled around and everybody went remote, we actually dove into creating remote event experiences, right? So really a lot of that was packaging up streaming in a unique way. And a lot of that was really, can we create more engaging and more immersive environments? Standing that up very quickly to address the kind of macro issues that were happening across society meant for an okay experience, right? It was, it was not a substitute, but it was a alternative, and it did allow us to convey information in meaningful ways. But David, I agree with you, in your comment that they're less than impressive right now, right? And we could dive into metaverse, we could dive into virtual reality, we could dive into lots of other mediums that I think have the potential to make remote access to experiences more interesting and more engaging. Yeah. But before we do that, I want to find out, Sid, what specifically are you guys doing? I know Miro has a host of tools at its disposal, but what are you seeing as some of the more effective ways to connect your in-person and your remote audiences? And what are you doing to truly elevate that experience?
Yeah, got it. That is what we're all about, right? Collaboration and and all flavors of it, and really making that a better experience. And yeah, you mentioned virtual, you mentioned hybrid. That's very much there to stay, like a new normal, but it's very new. So it feels very unnatural when we engage in such a way. I think we're at the early stages. We see this as a wicked problem where we don't really have all the answers yet, and this could as well be a 20-year problem for us to solve. But we're getting to better answers, right? And hybrid is never something we push for. It is not that we say to someone, "Hey, why don't you just come and you stay at home?" Right? It is not something it's not a driver behind it, but it just happens, right? And if you look at your agenda from yesterday and you have maybe 6 or 7 meetings, can you really point out which are virtual, which are hybrid, which were in person? That is difficult because everyone has their own way of building their agenda out in the sessions they do. And during pandemic, this was so predictable because everyone was 16 steps away from their office and it was all virtual. And now post-pandemic, we have so many new flavors, but we're still at an early stage. But we do need to build strategies for it to make it work, right? Because it's very much there to stay. It's growing. I think if you do both and you're open to it, it also means that you learn to take best of both worlds because there is a strength to it, right? And there's this one article from John Cleese, and I love this article, and I think it's 15 or 18 years old, where a reporter asks him, how do you make up these jokes from Monty Python, right? How do you do that? And he first jokingly says, like, well, not from our laptops, but he continues to explain that it's really late, the family sleeps, it's after 10, and that's where he's all by himself. He calls it a tortoise enclosure. That's where he connects the dots. That's where the story unfolds, right? But then he says, I would have never have gotten there if I not first go out, meet people, see things, do things. So it's the combination of both. And in a way, he's explaining hybrid that long ago, where you really see hybrid is different times, it's different locations, and he's doing both to come up with really creative results. And I think if you start looking to hybrid ways of working in such a way and really enable distributed teams in such a way, you'll get with really cool end results. And that is a new way of working, and we really have to get used to that. And we are trying to figure out where are we as Miro part of this equation. So, and that means also a heavy focus on synchronous meetings, but also asynchronous meetings, and trying to figure out what that means, right? And meeting cultures need to change. We all know that, but in what way, right?
It's interesting. And
yeah.
Sid, is there in researching, what you've done, is there a specific tool that's built around the Miro platform that, you're using often for conducting these hybrid virtual
Yeah. So hybrid, it happens so much to us that we really need to build a solid strategy for it and really get comfortable with it. So, and it brings change on multiple angles, right? So we always, when we set up engagements which are going to be hybrid, and we know this, we call it a rule of two. We have two screens, two facilitators, and two agendas, right? And if we can say yes to all of them, we're really comfortable with doing hybrid. So that's how we do it in our program. Two screens, really, because if we know that we're going to be a bunch of people in a room and someone's dialing in, we don't want to compromise the experience where we say we're now going to present content, so you're going to be like this little thumbnail, right? We still want to see you, we still want to have that connection, so we always have one screen which we roll in, which has the people on it, so we can address people, and we don't have to compromise on the content. So what we usually do is we roll one screen which is next to the table, so we can still talk in one natural direction. But again, the two people aspect is because it's so complex, right? We have this, even if we train people, they're really focused on everyone for like 2 minutes, and then they're focused on the people in the room because that's where you get the most feedback from, right? And the two people aspect is really having a facilitator really focused on the experience for someone not being there and the experience for someone who is there, because they're so wildly different. And we started with saying, what is actually the digital twin of first class? Because if you come into the center, I can give you a first class experience. You eat the food, you meet the people, you do a tour. But what is the equivalent of a tour for someone who's not there? And this is something we need to figure out and learn, trying to figure out what is their experience if we're touring, what are they doing, right? And this is a creative search. We don't have all the answers, but we're slowly, because we are so intentional about it, get to really good answers.
That's great.
I will say, I don't want to dive too deeply into the Miro universe, but we used a Miro board for an Intel meeting recently, and man, it was brainstorming session with people from 3 different locations. This is not a briefing center, right? This was just a meeting, but just the ability to collaborate on sticky notes and concepts, and for everybody to be working off of the same thing at the same time in a unique way was so much more engaging, and such a simple but effective way to connect people when you ask somebody remotely to participate and they're able to do that on screen. It's a meaningful moment, and it definitely connects audiences, I think, very effectively. I'll take one crack at the future, and just as we think about Apple Vision Pro and the advent of new hardware and new headsets and new technologies, I do think that there is a play in the virtual reality space for remote audiences. If you guys have not tried VR chat, it's essentially you can spin up an avatar of yourself and others. Everybody can go meet in a virtual space and connect and do things in fun and unique ways. That's everything from talking to one another and understanding proximity so that you can hear somebody that you're next to, and it sounds like you're next to them, to being able to express yourself with emojis and do so in an immersive environment. We're not there yet because headsets become relatively annoying and uncomfortable after 10 or 15 minutes. And I think that we're probably still a ways away from spending serious time in them. But I do think that they potentially will be playing a bigger role as they become more prevalent. The Apple Vision Pro, I think, is going to be priced out of most people's range to actually have one. But I think there's a space. I think there's an opportunity there for sure.
When do you think,
Tom,
Shama, when do you think this is going to be widely used? I mean, it's there. There's a lot of cool examples, but the device is one thing, right? But then we need the tools to evolve with it as well. So if you look at these briefing centers, when do you think this will be widely adopted in the majority of those?
I mean, man, I've been hearing 3 to 5 years for like 12 years now. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the standard response. We're seeing it adopted now a little bit, but again, 15 minutes at a time. It is not a substitute. It is not a replacement. It is additive. It is a component of the overall. I don't know that I see it fully replacing anything at any point. I think that it can certainly be a very interesting and useful element of a much larger meeting. If you take 10 to 15% of that meeting virtually, I think that's probably a big win for virtual reality and augmented reality, experiences, at least for those folks using the platforms. I'm not sure I see a future in the next 5 years that says we're going to be in headsets for more than, those brief moments. They can be very powerful moments, but, I don't think that people will be spending an hour in there. That first barrier of the headset and discomfort and hygiene and everything else is going to take a while to overcome, I think.
So I think there's one thing to add there, which is we've been talking about the live hybrid experience and the virtual experience. So like, how do I access what's going on in the room in a way that makes sense for me as a remote executive? And as Sid said, these are major decision makers in many cases, right? The most senior executives are the one who can't be there face to face. So this idea of it's never going to be great or as good as face to face in many cases. So what happens? So they're able to participate to a certain degree. Post briefing, I think, is a place where we can win and optimize for victory, which is the idea of taking the solutioning that happened in the room, decisions that happened in the room, prototyping, any type of archetyping that was done, and then somehow preserve that in a way that post-event it's easily communicable within the client organization and with others. I don't know if that's really has been an area of focus for the briefing program world, but the ability to have some landing page where everything is collected and then promoted. And one last piece is the customer can access it any time. They can disseminate it as they will throughout the organization. But then how do you resume the conversation at, say, a conference or a trade show that the industry show they're going to go to? And how do you reactivate that portal or that library of content or solutioning that was developed in a way that closes the conversation, right? Or accelerates the conversation that you have with the customer. And so post-briefing, I think, is an area that is ripe for thought. I don't think anyone's solved for it just yet with this is the way that works every time, but putting more thought into how do you take the output from the meeting and then activate it within a customer's organization. Obviously, sales has a lot to do with that. It's not just the briefing program manager to handle that entire life cycle. But I think there's a lot of value to be captured in the outputs from the briefing post.
So one thing Apple always has quite well done is timing, right? So it could be that this is the timing to that where it starts accelerating. We're really close on the ball, really trying to figure out, but also co-creating content, trying to figure out where the value lies, right? So constantly testing. And a few years back when we had these VR sets, it was not used because for two reasons. Mainly, there was a heavy focus on virtual reality, meaning when you put the headset up, you're gone, right? You don't see anything in your surroundings. People didn't like that because they feel looked at. And also for hygiene reasons. So that was not really adopted in an executive briefing center context. But now that you have this mixed reality and artificial intelligence, artificial reality, where you put it on and you still see your surroundings, that makes it easier and lowers the barrier of actually starting using it. And I really like the idea of an obeya, like a war room, when you have a clean space, you put on the headset, and suddenly you have all these people, but also the content around you to start working on, right? I think that will be such a cool way to collaborate with whoever is wherever, right?
Cool.
Yeah, I agree. So, by the way, quick room reset. My name is Mike Shaman with Gen City Labs. We are in our twice monthly session. Whether you are watching live with us right now on LinkedIn or on YouTube or Twitter or other platforms, or whether you're listening to this after the fact, thank you guys for joining. We do it every couple of weeks with different guests, different topics, all about innovation, all about digital experiences for brands and marketers. We've been chatting with Tom and Sid here about executive briefing centers and the experiences within them.
And Tom, I just have to say, before we go live again, I'm going to need you to get the same camera that Sid has. It is perfection.
It is.
Thank you.
I know. And the mic too. You sound good too. God damn it. I'm using my stock Microsoft Surface tablet. stuff.
Okay.
But
I'll
no,
link the spec.
your lighting is on point, Sid.
Yeah.
You've done well. So we're winding down here. I guess last questions for you guys and kind of final thoughts. Where you see the future of the space going. I know we kind of talked about remote hybrid audiences, but Tom, I'd love to hear from you about design trends, what people are thinking of right now as they're evaluating investing in a space and the environments that they're building.
Yeah.
And what do we have laid out for us in the next few years?
So I mean, I could sum it up with the phrase "surprise and delight." Like I talked about rarity before, and scarcity, and experiences they can have nowhere else. So I mean, your customer or your partner or your prospect is visiting you to develop something that will advance their organization, but they're also people, right? And so I think, again, this is another trend that could be brought out of the experiential realm and brought into briefing programs, is designing spaces that allow the briefing program manager to create moments of surprise and delight. And that means, like, just sounds hokey and it might not work for every brand, but hidden doors that give you access to another area of the space that are a wow moment. Or the use of these aren't expensive solutions. The use of really careful lighting to light a room and a space in a way that is just remarkable, right? The use of decor, right? So it doesn't have to be. I'm all for amazing, beautiful, architecturally stunning environments. I mean, we love to create and inhabit those types of environments, but there are very smart things you can do to create these moments of surprise and delight that fit Sid's description of this, like, how do you design the program for different beats throughout the briefing, right? Whether it's a half day or a full day or a two-day experience. So I think that's the big trend right now, is coming up with clever, creative, almost Disney-like ways of surprising and delighting your visitors.
Yeah, great.
You said the word beats, which makes me think of my theater background. A beat would be how you break down a scene. If you're actually doing script analysis, it is all that same storytelling, and then likening it to Disney. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just trying to come up with it, and it doesn't always have to be that costly, right? So one of the things that we have in our briefing center is someone on my team ordered a coffee printer. So when you order a cappuccino, the logo of the customer is printed on top, and that they love it. And it's usually this photo they take of it, which ends up on LinkedIn, and that is not an expensive thing for the impact that it makes, apparently. And I like the details, and often it's in the details, right? And I love it when you really work on the subtleties and the customer really notice it and they address it and they appreciate it. And that is, I think, the beauty of a briefing program as well, because we get so much time to prepare a single customer engagement, so you can go really deep and really trying to figure out what personalization means, right? And really taking hints from a conversation. I was in a conversation yesterday with someone from a customer that found out that we have a dog-friendly place. And she said, I might bring the dog. And I'm now trying to figure out, can I bring dog toys to the center to really surprise her that we're listening and doing something and really personalizing it. And that is, I like writing that down, thinking about it, and actually playing with thoughts like that. And that's what I'm trying to say with it. It doesn't have to be so costly. And you can make an impact with really listening to these details.
Yeah.
I love it. And yeah, we get so caught up in creating amazing, expansive digital experiences that I love the coffee printer reference. I love the subtle touch, the little elements of personalization. And that's not just your name on a screen or the logo of your company, but color schemes and other subtle things that people can do to alter the space that are a little bit of a nod to the individuals in there. I think that's great. Yeah. Well, for those of you who have joined us today, I very much appreciate your time and attention. Please give Sid and Tom a follow on their LinkedIns. Feel free to add everybody up here. We would love to connect with anybody after the fact. If you guys have any additional questions, any concerns, if you have any needs, feel free to reach out to anybody on the panel. Please do join us in a couple of weeks as we will be posting up our unless MK I'm wrong, do we have a topic for our mid-August session yet?
We have a guest pitched. We're waiting on their response about an innovative Web3 loyalty program of the coffee variety. So if not in 2 weeks, we might save that for a few weeks later. And then another interesting idea came up, and I'd love people's feedback on possibly having a session that's a bit of an AMA. Bring your questions, bring the things you're not sure about, bring what's daunting you from the technology or storytelling point of view, and let's make it really audience heavy and bring some of our developers and more technical folks on and just really support people building awesome experiences.
Love it.
Cool.
And, Sid and Tom, we will definitely be circling back to this topic because one of the things that we're going to be doing this year is kind of introducing kind of a high-level overview during initial discussions, and then we'll circle back and take a deep dive with you guys in a few months, see what's happened, see what's changed, talk about any news of the day. So
Cool.
want to say to both of you guys, thanks so much for spending the time with us today. It is absolutely appreciated. For those of you listening on various platforms, appreciate you all as well. And we will be talking with everybody very soon.
Very cool.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Good day. Take care.